Thank you, Asha, and thank you everybody for joining. I do want to make this conversational, so even though I will go through my very short presentation about my career, please ask your questions because then I can answer it as we go along. And thank you for spending at least an hour of your Saturday afternoon with us today. And Asha, the only time I'm ever called doctor is when I talked to the president of Cal State East Bay. My sister was getting a real PhD at the same time that I was being awarded my doctorate. So she always gives me a hard time that mine's not real. Anyway, um, why don't we go ahead and get started? And um, first, let me explain what a board director is, because frankly, when I was in at Cal State getting my degree, I had no idea what a board director was. But basically, corporations and many nonprofits have a several board members, that between 7 and 9, and some as high as 15 of them, that oversee the strategy of the organization. And the responsibility of a board of directors to make sure that you have the right chief executive officer in place to execute against the strategy, and that you have the right strategy for the long-term sustainability of the organizations. Those are the two main critical criteria of a board of director. But having said that, many of the responsibilities have expanded because of the focus on the environment, social, and governance issues, diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, and so forth. So I can get into that a little bit later as we move through. So why don't we go ahead and get started, and I will talk a little bit about my career, and through that we'll probably generate even more questions that I've seen up on the chat room. You want to advance to the next slide, Asha? So I'm a Navy brat. My dad ran away from home at the age of 17 and joined the US Navy. He was in there for 20 years. I actually have a sister. So there's three of us, but you know how it is. You only get pictures of the first two, and then the third one, you just never seem to get pictures of. So I was born in San Francisco, and so was my brother. And since my dad was in the Navy, we're only 10 months apart. So it looks like we're twins. And then my sister's 3 years younger. I moved around a little bit, and then ended up predominantly in the East Bay and Hayward. I went to Moreau Catholic High School, where I played volleyball. So I ended up as co-captain of the varsity volleyball team and student body president, and met my husband there. I wanted to go to Santa Clara University and get a degree in accounting, but because I had my brother and my sister right behind me, mom says, look, I can't afford it. You're going to Cal State. And at that time, we were a commuter college. I think we only had one dorm that was on the apartments up the main road. But I got my accounting degree, and I worked full-time in retail at Southland Mall, at Casual Corner and Earring House. And 4 years later, got my degree. I was told to interview with some of the CPA firms, which are the accounting firms, public accounting firms. And not knowing what they were, I said, okay, fine, I'll do that. I mean, I got my degree in accounting. I ended up working for Ernst & Winnie, or Ernst & Young now, and I was there for 7 years and really moved around the profession. Asha, if you want to move on to the next one. So Ernst & Young, 7 years, then went to a bank. One of my clients was First Nationwide Bank. And at that point in time, it was still okay to move to a client as their controller. In the meantime, I also had a family. That was part of the reason I left Ernst, is I looked up and there were no women partners with kids, and I was already pregnant with my first. So decided to go to First Nationwide Bank as their controller. I have 3 boys, and that's to the left and or to your right, and now they're grown up and 2 of them are married. And the third one's living with his girlfriend in Denver. So I'm hoping they're going to get married. Anyway, during that time, I always have volunteered. So I was the volleyball coach for girls volleyball at St. Clement's Grammar School for 10 years. And then when the boys were old enough, was coach for boys sand volleyball. And then I also was on the church foundation board. So that was my first exposure to being on a board. And I really enjoyed the leadership elements of that. Let me stop for a second and see see if any questions on there.
So Evelyn, there are a lot of questions,
Sure.
but let me pick one relevant one. How has your volunteerism had an impact on your career?
So I really believe in volunteering and giving back because we are lucky. We've graduated with a college degree, and many of us with an MBA. We're the top 35% of Americans in the United States that actually have a college degree and can do something with it. So I believe in giving back. And when you're interviewing for board seats, many of the board of directors will cast about their networks to find out who knows you and what are you like in a boardroom. Are you a disruptor? Are you somebody who can get along with the rest of the board members and contribute? And do you show up? Because I will tell you, this is a lesson learned towards the end of this, 99% of your success is showing up because many people don't. So they'll volunteer to be on an organization because they think it'll look good on their resume, but they never show up, which means others who are on that committee or that board don't actually give you a very good reference. So I think volunteering is important, but you have to be passionate about it. You have to enjoy it because then you don't show up. Asha, is there another question or should we move on?
There are a lot of questions, but I'll put them in when you're saying something that is related, if that makes
Okay,
sense.
so
Yeah.
let's move on to the next one. Then I was recruited to Schwab after 7 years at the bank. I came in as their controller, and after 4 years, and now it was 7 years at First Nationwide, 7 years as an accounting, public accounting, 4 years as a controller. I really decided I wanted to move into general management, and I knew I had to pick up skills that I didn't have because I was predominantly finance. The company agreed to let me go to Stanford Senior Executive Program for the summer. And because I had developed great relationships with the executives of Schwab, when I came back from that program, they trusted me enough to move me around the company. Now, at that time, Schwab did not really have a program for moving people around the company to gain the skills they needed to be a general manager. It was something I had to do on my own, but because I had a relationship with many of the senior executives, they trusted me enough to say, okay, let me try you here. So I came in and I managed 3 or 4 branches in the South Bay and did that for about a year. I really learned a lot about selling and business development, but I discovered I missed the strategy elements. So I went to another executive who I had a relationship with. And I told him, look, I love what I'm doing, but I really miss strategy. So if you have something coming up in the next 6 months to a year, think of me. And he said, yeah, Ev, I do. I have a new strategy that we're trying to implement. And so 6 months later, he called me up and said, do you want to do this? Brand new startup within his organization. And I had to develop a team, develop a strategy, and execute against it. So I did. I did that for about a year or so, and then I got a call from Dave Patrick, who's the co-CEO at Schwab, and he said, I need help. I just fired the president. I have 12 direct reports, and because I trust you, we worked together before, come and help me. It was a totally undefined job. So here's where I took the risk, totally undefined. And I said, okay, I'll come 18 months, because I think after 18 months, people forget who you are and your skill set. And I'm not schlepping your bags. So this has to be something that where I can also learn. So I became his chief of staff. And it's where I learned 2 really important lessons. The first one is you have to create a win-win situation for things to be able to move forward. And the second one is, as a CEO of a company, you have to surround yourself with people who will tell you the truth and have the best interests of the company at heart. Because people will come to you with their point of view, but you really can't make a great decision unless you have other points of view. So part of my role was to bring him multiple points of view. And that's where I learned that lesson and took it forward in my own leadership. After 18, go ahead, Asha.
if we could ask a question.
Sure.
Claudia, can you unmute and ask your question?
So my question was kind of, how did you transition? How did you make the lateral move? Like what skill, like what motivated you, and how did you decide to make a lateral move from your controller role to like the vice president in the management?
Well, it was because I always knew I wanted to be a general manager, and I couldn't get there following the straight line of the controller. I could maybe, but it would take a while. And I really wasn't in line for the chief financial officer at Schwab because we had a very strong player in there. So I wanted to be a general manager. And the way I made my move is, I went to Chuck Schwab and I said, look, this is what I want to do. Are you guys willing to support me in this? And they said yes. And I think part of it's because I was the first Asian executive at Schwab. So they were willing to give me that chance. And because they trusted me, right? I mentioned before, I had a good relationship with the other executives because of the work that I did. And I gained a reputation for somebody who was focused on doing was right for the company, not necessarily, it wasn't all about me. It was all about what's right for the company. So I had gained that reputation. So that's why they trusted me. And when I came back from the senior executive program, that's why they allowed me to move around and gain the skills I had. I will tell you, it was hard. When you're one person in the entire company, which is the controller, there's only one of you, and you move into a role where there's many of you, you realize that, and I didn't think it would affect me, but it did. Your person, who you are is tied up in your job title. And I just didn't think that would happen to me, but it is. And so it's something you have to overcome. The second thing I had to overcome was moving around the company. I would see my peers move ahead of me in terms of promotions. I was always last in line for stock options and raises because I was learning. I was always new on the job. And when I would see that, I'd have to kick myself and remind myself why I was doing this. I was doing this to gain a broader perspective, to gain skills I didn't have, and it was okay, right? Because that's the thing you have to talk yourself through when you see this and you make those choices. And it's all about taking risk and knowing that you'll have people who have your back while doing it, which is another lesson learned, which I'll get into in a second. So that's how I ended up moving around.
That's a great story. Relating to that, Simona, you want to ask a question?
So my question is, as your experience with being like a CEO, a CFO, chief administrative officer, how did you anticipate and handle pushback or negative feedback as being a woman in like these top ranking leadership positions?
I've always been the only woman in many of my previous roles. When I was controller for First Nationwide Bank, for a period of time there, we were owned by Ford Motor Company. So they had a controller summit of all the controllers of Ford Motor Company, including their subsidiaries. It was 200 men and me. So I've been used to doing that. When I was at Ernst & Ernst in public accounting, I was the audit manager, which meant I managed the engagement. And the client would come in and talk to the men in the room, thinking that they were the ones in charge and not me. So I'm used to it. And a lot of it really boils down to your own leadership skills and the respect your team has for you. And if your team has respect for you, they're the ones that are going to stand up for you and tell the others that, hey, she's the boss. So I actually think, to be honest with you, that part of the reason that I was able to move around the company is because I was the only Asian female executive at Schwab. And they recognize that. And that in a lot of companies today, if you're the only, there's a lot of slack they will give you in terms of moving you around, especially if you do a great job, because it's amazing. I don't want to stereotype Asians, but many Asians are unwilling to take the risk of moving up and trying something new. Many of us want to stay steady. In fact, it's a critique that I have of many women. They don't want to move into a role until they know that they're really ready, whereas guys will move into a role even if they're not ready. They will say, yes, I'm ready, and they'll do it. And it's just something that we have to overcome as women, that you may think you're not ready, but in many ways you really are. And then a lesson learned that I'll talk about in a minute is surround yourself with people who have your back, will give you advice, and are jealous of your success. It's important that you do that. It's amazing to me how many people surround themselves with friends that put them down or are jealous of their success and undermine their careers. And life is too short. Why do that? So anyway, that's my answer to your question. I hope that answered it, Simone.
It did. Thank you.
So 18 months in with Dave, we acquired a U.S. trust out of New York. I volunteered to lead the integration team. And then the New York company asked me to be their chief financial officer and chief administrative officer. And I had 3 kids at home. I commuted to New York for 3 years. And I was able to do that because, again, another lesson learned, marry well. It gets along with have somebody who has your back. So my husband sold his company at the same time. His dad came down with Alzheimer's, and we just thought it was important that one of us stay home with the kids. And he agreed to do that one and let my career flourish. After 3 years in 9/11, I came back to Schwab and headed up the product development for the mutual fund company. And then a year later was promoted into the president and CEO role for the investment management part of the company. I did that for about 4 years, really enjoyed that one. And that was where I really was able to exercise my desire to be a general manager. And then I retired in 2007, partly because we brought in a new CEO whose values and mine clashed. And I believe if you're going to go work for a company and be successful, you have to have similar values, because if the values aren't similar, then you're always going to be miserable. So I can talk about that in a minute. So I retired in 2007. By then, as president and CEO of Charles Schwab Investment Management, I had experience being with a board. I had an independent board of directors. And I thought, okay, when I retire, maybe I'll do board work, because I really enjoyed the intellectual challenge and the discussions that we had. And while I was still president of the investment management firm, I was asked to join the board of Long's Drugs, which many of you are familiar with, which we sold to CVS about a year later. But that was my first exposure for an outside board. And when I retired in 2007, I thought, okay, I'll be chief operating officer or CEO of a smaller company, or I'll do board work. And frankly, the board work came at me faster. So I was on the board of Long's Drugs. And then the recruiter who found me for that one asked if I would be interested in being on the board of Aeropostale, which was Team Clothing out in New York. And at first, when they saw my resume, they said, she knows nothing about customers. I mean, it's Schwab, different than retail customers. And the recruiter, who became a very good friend, said, yes, but she has the same cultural values. So you really will enjoy working with her. And we did. I interviewed, and at the end of the interview, I asked them, are they worried that I don't have the direct customer relationship? And they said, nope, you're just right for this role. So that's how I ended up on the board of Aeropostale. Yes.
If I can ask, there's a question from Eric, more relating to both your previous to board as well as into board experience. So Eric, do you want to ask your question?
Sure.
Yeah, so my question is really just about kind of finding your voice, especially a voice that kind of matches your leadership style in situations that might not necessarily be conducive to your leadership style. Maybe the values are a little bit different, or towards something that might not necessarily be your leadership style. So how do you find your voice or make sure you're present for that?
Could you say a little bit more, Eric? Are you talking about an organization where your values are not the same as the company's values?
I guess not necessarily about the company's values, but maybe in terms of the situation. So for example, in our class, we talked about kind of the different leadership styles. Some styles could be more participatory, others could be kind of, more transactional. So have you ever found yourself in situations where maybe you are actually a participatory person, but the meeting itself or the situation is actually just focused on transactional?
Yes, And the answer is yes. And I think as a leader, you actually have to have multiple leadership styles, not just one, because you have to recognize the situation that you're in. And a very good leader can adapt to the situation. So if it's a transactional, you're transactional. If it's participatory, you're participatory. And I would have to say 80% of the time, you're probably going to be participatory. If you want to be the leader that's known to value other people's opinions, and if you really want to surround yourself with people who have your back, they want to know that you value their advice. I will tell you, one of the reasons I left Schwab, when we brought in this new CEO who had been at the company through an acquisition, and I already knew that our values were not similar. He moved around the company to ask everybody's advice about being in this new role. And I said to him, why are you going around the company asking people's advice when I know you never take it? And he kind of sat back and didn't say anything. And I knew that was his sense of values. He did it for show. He didn't do it to really ask, how can I be a better leader in this role? And that's when I knew it was time for me to leave. I hope that helped, Eric.
Thank you.
Asha, more questions?
I think we'll keep going. And
Okay.
yes.
So what? So keep on going. Next slide. So what do I do now? Then when I was still at Schwab, I served on several nonprofit boards. I was chair of the board for Bishop O'Dowd High School, where my kids went to school. I was chair of the board for Women's Initiative, which helped lower income women start their own businesses. And we were helping about 2,000 women a year start their own businesses. That was in San Francisco. On for-profit boards, I already talked about Eric Postal, Long Strugs. I went on a bank board. I went on a mutual fund board and exchange traded fund boards. Those are all gone. And now I serve on the boards that are listed up here. My for-profit boards are Tempur Sealy, Blue Shield of California, and Health Equity, which is a health savings account, a real estate fund, and then Protivity, which is a global consulting firm. My Tempur Sealy board is I got based on relationships. So I get a call. I was giving a talk at a women's leadership group down in San Jose for engineers. And somebody in the audience liked what I had to say. And when Tempur Sealy was looking for an audit committee chair, they asked this individual and she remembered me. So I went in and for the interview with the chair of the board, and he says, I already know all about you. Dave Patrick and I, and remember I worked for Dave as his chief of staff, Dave and I are on the US ski team board together. And he says, if I can get you, I'll be very lucky. That was my interview. And that's how I ended up on the board of Tempur Sealy, where I still chair the audit committee. And I've been on that board since 2009. Same for Blue Shield of California. It was all through the relationship. So about 20% of board positions are found through executive recruiters. The other 80% is really through networks and your brand in your community and the broader network of your network actually is how they finally find it. Why I enjoy this work and why it's, I'm lucky that I've built a portfolio of different industries, healthcare, consumer products, real estate, consulting, because I like the intellectual challenge. I get to meet people I otherwise would never have met. And I like the variety. I find I get bored if I'm only doing one thing. And then I also do have fun. So this is fun, but I meant fun outside of what you consider work. Asha, next.
Sorry, Evelyn.
Sure.
We have a question from Angelica.
Okay.
Yes. So applying what strategies and approaches have helped you exercise an influential voice and be heard and taken seriously on these as a member of these corporate boards?
So just like anything else, you have to build a relationship so that people trust you and your brand moves ahead of you. So the brand I had developed at Schwab, which is all about doing what's right for the company, and it wasn't about me, has helped me to have a voice that people were willing to listen to, even if it disagreed. On the board, it's finding where's the power, because in any situation like this, there's always one or two people who really have the power in the room. And it's finding that power and making sure you have a good relationship with that person and that that person understands. Remember what I said earlier, that as a board member, your responsibility is to make sure the company has a right strategy for the long term. So again, if you think about your role in the organization, it's really about helping the company last for the long term. It's not necessarily about, it's not all about you, right? And when people realize that you're doing this because it's the right thing to do for the company, they will really trust you and listen to your voice. The other thing I would have to say is a friend of mine was interviewing for the board of Walmart, and a question that she was asked is, do you know how to stay quiet? And I thought, what a weird question. But the reality is you want to add your voice when you want it, when you're have an idea or a point of view to make. You don't want to be the dominant voice in the room that drowns out everybody else's opinions. So the feedback that I get from my boards is that when I do say something, people listen because what I say is an important idea from the perspectives that I bring to the table. We just, in one of my boards, we just let somebody go as a board member because this individual did not contribute anything new to the discussion. And this individual only agreed with what everybody else had to say. And so if you're not contributing to the discussion in a positive way, then people will recognize that and say, okay, I'm not going to trust her or him to be able to move forward.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Evelyn, question from Beatrice.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So my question is, what personality trait would you say most contributed to the advancement of you as a leader?
Personality trait. I think it was the attitude, having a great attitude and coming forward, not complaining, but coming forward with solutions when I saw a problem. One of the things that Paul Markovich, who's the CEO of Blue Shield, who I admire a lot, he believes the three things that really propel your career as a leader is showing up, one, two, being accountable. So doing what you say you're going to do, when you're going to do it. And third is if you see a problem, not necessarily in your area, that you take responsibility for trying to solve the issues in a win-win situation again, as I mentioned, that's bigger than just your organization. And those are the three big leadership skills that he tries to teach throughout the organization. And it was something that I believed in also when I was going through my own career. And again, that builds your reputation as somebody who's focused on doing what's right for the organization.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Asha, you want to move on unless there's another question?
Sure, we can do that.
So for fun, these are my my family now. I have 3 grandkids, and this was in Hawaii when we could go to Hawaii before COVID. And then my husband and I like to travel, so that's the spirit and the soul. This is Patagonia in Chile. There was a sign there that said 500 miles from the end of the earth. And then I'm an avid knitter, so it's one of the scarves I've made. I'm a master knitter. So my kids were all into sports, baseball, basketball, swimming. And you know, when you're sitting at a swim meet for 8 hours to watch your son swim for that 1 minute of swim, you had to do something. So, and then I was in always double headers because my boys were big into baseball. So I took up knitting. And then I'm a big jigsaw puzzle because I think it exercises both sides of your brain. So this is And it has to be at least 1,000 pieces. So that's what I like to do for fun. And constantly learning. So what you can see throughout my career is I really believe in learning. And maybe we can pop into the last slide, which is really all about lessons I've learned. And I think it will generate a lot of good questions from you guys. Not that you don't have them already. Okay, Asha, move on. Lessons learned. So this is built around the acronym ASSET, because we're all assets, as I mentioned before, especially as you have graduate and or you're already working and thinking about your career. As I mentioned before, attitude is everything. Showing up is everything. 99% of your success will be your attitude and showing up. I mentioned earlier that I wanted to go to Santa Clara University. And you know, you run into people from Harvard and Yale and all these other ones. I think they help you maybe with networking to get in, but it's really what you do with your degree that determines how successful you're going to be. So going to Cal State East Bay has a great reputation in this community for first-time students who work hard and are willing to roll up their sleeves and get things done right away. And so showing up is 99% of your success with a great attitude of, let me figure out how to help solve this problem and make the company a win-win. Second one is the S, stay in love with learning. I think if you stop learning, you die, no matter how old you are. You could be 30 years old and stop learning. But you need to expand your learning. You can be an expert in one thing, but I would expand your learning because it gives you great perspective to be able to then be able to give advice to others if they ask for it. Surround yourself with people you have your back. And I talked about this a little bit before. I say marry well. It doesn't necessarily mean marry rich. It means marry somebody who's going to be supportive of your career and not jealous of your career. I find it hard to devote as much time as you have to your career and your family if you don't have support. And I said, surround yourself with people who have your back. That's not necessarily mean somebody who will only tell you the good news, but you really want somebody to tell you the truth, knowing that behind that is their desire for you to be successful. I know people talk about mentors and sponsors. The big difference between, and you could have both, and you should have both. Mentors, you tell the good, the bad, and the ugly, and they give you specific advice for how you move ahead. Sponsors, you tell the good, the good, the good. You really don't want them knowing about the bad and the ugly, because these are the ones that are going to promote you when you're not in the room. They're going to say, Eric did this fabulous job. I think he should be promoted into this next role. And you're not in the room. That's what a sponsor is. So you want both. Somebody you can tell the good, the bad, the ugly to, and somebody it's only the good, the good, the good. So they promote you outside of your being there. The fourth one is don't be afraid to take risks. This is about being an entrepreneur. I talk about it as calculated risks, meaning if you're surrounding yourself with people who have your back, you ask their advice and you weigh that advice as you think about the risk you're taking. Also, if you surround yourself with people who have your back, they'll encourage you to take those risks. So the things that I did to move around the company and pick up skills I didn't have, I had other relationships that I could talk to others about and say, here's what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think about it? It really does help to take that calculated risk, but still take the risk and move forward. And then finally, when you're successful, which you will be, give back your time, talent, and treasure, because we're only on this world once, and others will benefit from your perspective, your time, your talent, and your treasure. Now, I gave the same lessons learned because I really believe in it for the commencement speech at Cal State 3 or 4 years ago. And at the end, I said, okay, this spells asset, but if you don't do the last two, then you're just an ass. So it's a good way of remembering the lessons learned.